This conference will now be recorded.
So since we're close enough, I'll call the meeting to order, noting that we have all the committee members here except Todd, and hopefully he will join us. So I'm Charles Dice. I'm chairman of the Southwest Coastal Citizens Advisory Committee, and if I'll let the other members introduce themselves.
Chris Anderson in Arch Cape.
Linda Eierman, also in Arch Cape.
Margaret Treadwell, I live in Astoria.
All right, thanks. So next we've got the review of the meeting summary, and that would be the minutes that Ian sent out. I think the minutes looked really good to me, so I would move we accept the minutes unless anybody else has some changes they want to make.
I have a change on page 3 of the minutes under public comments and input. The last sentence says Mr. Dice and Ms. Eierman reiterated their opinion that the creek, meaning Cedar Creek, held value and still wanted it included on the recommendations. I don't think my name should be there because I don't feel that I advocated for that. I didn't advocate against it, and I might have made a comment of some sort about the impact of being on the list, but I don't know anything about that creek. I had never heard of it till that meeting, and so especially since there was some concern by the public members, I want to be neutral at this point. So if my name could be removed, I think that's consistent with the audio. And if not, I'd like it anyway.
Okay, noted. I did go back and listen to the audio and read the transcript, and I thought that I had gotten it down correctly. Just to clarify though, my understanding was that the committee generally was in favor of at least entertaining the Goal 5 review process for that creek to determine whether it was significant or not. So that doesn't imply that you know what its significance is, or we're saying that it was significant, but rather just suggesting that it be something to go through the Goal 5 significance process. But I'll go back and listen to the audio again, and I can make that last sentence just more general.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
And Ian, that was also my recollection. It was exactly what you said. So, and I have no objection to making that change. So with that made, does anybody want a second approving the minutes?
I would second it.
Okay, Linda seconds. All in favor? Charles, aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. That's unanimous for the 4 of us anyway.
Aye.
Thanks. So I was also going to, if Todd were here, I was going to also ask Todd to kind of give us an update on what's happening with the countywide committee. I haven't heard anything for quite a long time. And Ian, I would imagine you participate or observe in those meetings as well. So maybe you could kind of give us a quick rundown on what's going on with the countywide committee.
I actually have not been able to attend the last couple of countywide meetings. So to my knowledge, you know, the liaisons are going and reporting to the countywide committee about the recommendations made within each planning area. And then they're having their own discussion about the same topics. So hopefully Todd joins us at some point and can give us a report. I think you're right, we haven't gotten a report back from Todd on countywide activity lately. So I apologize, I don't have an update for you on that. However, the meeting minutes are all available on the county's website.
All right, great, thanks for that. Then I will turn it back to you for the public comment section.
Yes, it looks like we have Nancy Chase, Carol Johansson, and Guido Pepperoni here from the public, as well as Angie Riesland from the North Coast, or sorry, Mechanicsum Watershed Council. So if any of you would like to provide comments at this time, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Mr. Season, this is Guido Pepperoni. I just wanted to thank you and the staff for the quality of the minutes that were forwarded for this meeting. And at this point, I have no comments regarding the topics today. I will try and stay online until the end of the meeting and maybe provide some towards the end. So thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, anyone else going once? Going twice? All right, Charles, I don't see anyone else coming off mute, so go ahead.
Okay, so then I'm not aware of any old business that we need to carry forward. So I think we could move into today's topic, which is still part of this massive Goal 5 task. And today we're talking about fish and wildlife habitat. And I'm sure everyone got the packet that Ian sent out. So without further ado, I would suggest we move through the tables. So there's several tables. Table 1 talks about the wildlife habitat resources, existing policies. And it has 12 policies that pertain to the county-wide goals and policies regarding fish and wildlife areas and habitats. And then included for background, I think, there were a number of other policies that related to these, but were actually under Goal 16. So I kind of read through those, but I felt like I agreed with Ian's suggestions that it's good to know these things, but I don't think we have to dive into the Goal 16 stuff until we get to Goal 16. And then in Table 2, this was a list of the specific Southwest Coastal Community Plan policies and goals related to wildlife habitat resources. And in Table 2, there's looks like 8 policies. And so I think today, if we went through, the Table 1 policies, 1 through 12, and the Table 2 policies, we'd be doing a good job.
Can I have a general observation, maybe?
Sure.
As I read through this comprehensive plan, and particularly these sections on fish and wildlife, it strikes me that how little really applies to the Southwest coastal region. Matter of fact, the rural residential zones are often excluded because they're not viewed as being critical habitat for big game or, white-tailed deer or all kinds of things. And, we have a very unique piece of land here in that it is developed to a point, but it is also very rural. It's forested. It's inappropriately platted 100 years ago or whenever over a lot of land that should actually probably be public land, but it should be preserved or at least protected. And we have a real set of issues here. The community plan is very helpful. The comprehensive plan, not so much, because A, it's trying to cover the entire county, which is extremely varied. And B, I think, there's never been as much interest by the county in the South County, like the wetlands. I don't have a zone like the ones in the North County do. And so I just want to say, I hope we can focus on our unique issues here, because I don't think any of the other CACs will. It's not their job, and they don't, know our region. And it's kind of up to us to advocate to save our resources from development. So I just throw that out there as a kind of a soapbox statement, but I really am worried as I read through these things and I realize how few protections we have in this area.
Okay, well, I would not disagree with anything you said. I also tend to agree that at the county-wide level, there's an awful lot of focus on other areas in the county that have specific areas, especially for large game, that has been set aside in times gone by, and not so in our portion of it, the Southwest Coastal portion. On the other hand, we certainly get a lot of big game traffic down here, and while perhaps there's not an opportunity to set aside acreage like out in Jewel in the Roosevelt elk game preserve, I still think that in both the county's plan and in our Southwest Coastal plan, we should be mindful of the migratory corridors that the elk use. I know we all enjoy seeing the elk come through our neighborhoods. I certainly enjoy seeing them camp out in my yard. And I would hate to see development proceed, as you say, Linda, in a willy-nilly fashion that ends up cutting off their migration corridors. So I know personally I want to make sure we inject that concept and that thought into these policies as we go through them. But I'll shut up and let the other members give their 2 cents.
Well, it's true of the wetlands too. I mean, they have been fragmented because of development. We have a big significant wetland down near Shingle Mill Road, and the other ones have been, I'm sure at one time were all connected, but now they're fragmented, and that, probably makes them more vulnerable to more development and less likely to really qualify for the protections that they deserve. So.
Any thoughts from anybody else, or should we just kind of take these policies one at a time and see if there are any comments as we work our way through the policies?
I'm good with going through the policies. I mean, I think Linda is, making a valid point that we should consider as we go through them, but.
Okay.
Notice that Todd joined us.
Yes,
Hi, Todd.
hello, Todd. Welcome.
Yeah, hi. I think that the some kind of aspirational goals should be put in there, even if while we're talking about it, we could maybe formulate something. Have you, Linda, thought about an aspirational goal that we could put in the plan that would cover this?
Well, what I've done primarily is just look at which ones are applicable to our area. It's got a few ideas, but probably we have time to go through them all. So.
Yeah, and Linda, you did send out a your recommendations, which I'm assuming everyone got. Is that true?
I sent them to Ian.
Well, I got them
got
from
'em.
somebody. Okay, good. So great. We have those, and we'll make sure, they speak to specific policies, so I think we'll bring them up as we get to the relevant policies. So if we start with policy 1, that really has to do with a development not unduly conflicting with major big game ranges. The staff comments are that 1A is completed, and B, C, D, and E refer to F38 and the F20 zones, which don't exist anymore. So they're recommending deleting A and replacing the references to F38 and the F20 with F80 and AF.
Could we get Ian to enlarge this image on the screen a little bit? It's not legible as it is. One more, please. A couple
Todd,
more. Yeah.
Todd, that's about as large as I can make it, but
Okay.
you've got a zoom in and out function on GoToMeeting. If you tap on the share screen, you should see a plus and minus,
Oh yeah, I do.
and you can
Oh, that
enlarge it
helps
on
a great
your.
deal. Yeah, thanks. I can do that. Okay. That's great. Thanks, Ian.
Well, policies 1 and 2 are pretty much identical and just refer to the big game range and the peripheral big game range or something, and they're fine. I just comment that if there are any big game that wander into the rural residential zone, they have no protections because it specifically says we are not important for big game protection.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Linda. I mean, to me, policies 1 and 2 don't have a lot of applicability to our specific piece of the world, but from the county standpoint, it looked good to me, and the recommendations from staff looked like they were logical and kind of made sense. So I was fine with 1 and 2. I think as we go through this, that we will find other policies where we can insert our recommendations that would be consistent with kind of your opening statement as we go through the policy.
Right.
So then policy 3, so this one has to do with the county strictly enforcing the Oregon Forest Practices Act, which again, and speaking specifically to class 1 streams and lakes and class 2 streams. And this one kind of made sense to me, with the notion in mind that policy 3 really, in my mind anyway, and maybe it should be explicitly stated, but in my mind that applies to timberlands. So since they're invoking the Oregon Forest Practices Act, and that act only applies to timberlands, I'm kind of assuming that that's what policy 3 is speaking about. I think there are other policies that address rivers and streams and water bodies that are not on forested lands. And those are some of the ones that I would like to see us make perhaps some more stronger recommendations on. But policy 3 to me was probably okay. But I'll let others, anybody else got any comments?
If I could just jump in and offer a couple of things before the group gets into discussing policies 3 and 4. Charles, you're correct. Policy 3 is with regard to forestry activities specifically, and policy 4 is for riparian vegetation that's not subject to Forest Practices Act. In other words, activities that aren't industrial timber. So those two policies definitely go well together. And I just wanted to note on policy 3, which is proposed new policies, staff has identified that standards regarding riparian and stream setbacks are ambiguous and rely on terms that are not well defined. So this is related to section S 4.500 in the standards document, which is protection of riparian vegetation, where we have 2 categories which require riparian buffers. And this is where we have protections for coastal lakes and streams and estuaries and coastal shorelands, and then river segments, which are outside of coastal shoreland planning areas. And so, we've run into this issue of having an interpretation regarding the line of non-aquatic vegetation as only applying to estuarine water bodies. And so what this recommendation is saying is that we would revise our language in that section to align with what's currently established in the Forest Practices Act for forestry activities, which is much more inclusive than the phrase river segment. They actually have specific setback guidelines for different types of streams and river segments based on the area of the water body and the flow. And so there's some analysis that would be done to determine what type of stream requires which setback, but that data is available and would be much more clear than what our current standards are.
Okay, so thanks
Do
for
we know,
that.
may I ask a question, Ian? Do we know what if our standards in Oregon are comparable to those in Washington for the setbacks from streams and rivers?
I do not know how those compare, no.
My
Nor-
understanding just from other professionals is that ours are not as good, not as protective. But I think one of the public had something to say also.
Perhaps
Hi,
we
this is
should.
Julia, planning manager. I was just going to say, from personal experience with my parents' property, I can tell you that the bull trout setback in Washington is like 200 feet from the riverbank on each side.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So, I mean, that's just personal, anecdotal, but and just bull trout. But anyway, just throwing that in there. Also, if you look in the attachments to this agenda, you will actually, I think Ian brought it up.
Yeah.
You've got the stream size and the various setbacks. So this is actually a recommendation from Mr. Sinnott, who's the assistant biologist for ODFW for our region. So anyway, this is something that we were thinking was much more robust than what we have. And now I'll be.
I certainly support in these larger boundaries so that we can have sufficient vegetation that an aquatic ecosystem can be established along our creeks and rivers.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, for policy 3, again, to me that relates to timbered areas, and I like that that recommendation from Mr. Sinnott that Ian just had up there. And in fact, that is staff's, if you look at the table here, that is staff's recommendation for policy 3, is to bring policy 3 into alignment with those specific recommendations from Mr. Sinnott. At least that's my interpretation of that.
That's correct, Charles. I'll put agree with recommendation here.
All right, so policy 4 is kind of the one I wanted to pick on, and I think that's policy 4 is also one that Linda had already picked on in her comments, because policy 4 seems
Applies to
to.
us.
Sorry?
I just mean it applies to us, yeah.
Yeah, it applies to us, to non-timberland, and I certainly would like to see us have better protection. And personally, I would like to see us go back to what we had in a few years ago, before the design review committee in Arch Cape was abolished, and that is a 50-foot setback for wetlands, regardless of whether the wetland is in a coastal shoreland area, whatever that means, or in any other area at least in the southwest coastal planning area. So, that would certainly be one specific recommendation that I would make that we add, and I'll yield to Linda, who probably has more.
Well, one thing that occurred to me recently, because I agree with Charles. We need to get the protections for our wetlands, but we need to do it now and not wait 3 years till the comprehensive plan review is finished. So it did occur to me recently, since you brought up the line of non-aquatic vegetation, that the simple way to solve the problem and get the buffers applying again is simply to interpret, or change, but interpret the word aquatic as riparian. So the line of non-riparian vegetation is very well understood and defined. And I think that would solve, if that could be done, I'm sure that probably a consultation with Chris Crean, if county development wanted to do that, would be easy to just call it an interpretation. And that would make Arch Cape and Falcon Cove and the South Coast very happy. But anyway, policy 4 is a good start, I would say. But I don't know what order to put this in, but one thing that has, with the current law, and is that the buffers only run from the structure to the line of non-aquatic vegetation, or to the wetland itself if there is no buffer. And that has led the Coleman property the Arch Cape Deli remake to have their parking lot abut a wetland with no buffer at all. It's not a structure, but it is a land alteration. And so that makes me think that the policy for setbacks should not only be for structures, but should also be for land alterations and also vegetation, so that we truly have room for those bodies of water and those standing bodies like wetlands to migrate like we're told they need to do in order to be healthy. So that is one proposal that I would like to see added, is that the setback apply not only to structures, but also to land alterations like cut and fill and to vegetation.
Hey, this is
Should I go
Julia
on?
again. I just wanted to just jump in for just a second and tell you that more recently, when we did an update in 2018, so this would be after Mr. Coleman's approval, commercial parking is now considered a structure. Just so you know, going forward. But that change came in 2018. I think that was ordinance 2018-10. But anyway, so Mr. Coleman isn't bound by it because he has a different approval. His approval predates it. But going forward, commercial parking is considered a structure.
So I didn't catch all that. Are you saying that that wouldn't happen today because of a change?
The definition change of structure today would say that a commercial parking is considered a structure. It's in the definition. So today, going forward, I don't know that that solves all the issues that you're bringing up, but I just wanted to point that out, that today, that parking lot in that commercial area, in that RCC zone, would be considered a structure.
Okay, so that's been done by broadening the definition of structure.
In 2018, yes.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, I agree. It's certainly a step in the right direction. So any other recommended changes for policy 4?
Yes, I would like to be sure that it's well defined, because right now I believe it says streams and rivers or streams and lakes. But we know from our Arch Cape wetland that without specific definitions, we can't count on anything. So I think, what about rivers? What about creeks? What about floodplains? Are they included? What about a marsh or a wetland? And if it's a wetland, if they're included, does it have to be adjacent to another river or a creek? Or can it be a freshwater wetland that's like we have in Arch Cape that are, you know, fragmented pieces? So I think we need to be sure that what is intended to be covered is spelled out. And I hope, since this is about wildlife habitat, I hope that everything I mentioned is included. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say I agree. I would certainly support that recommendation and clarification, because I mean I have the same concern, and I also have a concern about and this may be a little bit off topic. It may be something that we revisit when when we finally get to March and get to talk about wetlands again. But certainly somewhere in our policies, whether it's here in this fish and wildlife topic or whether it's in the wetland topic, I would like to make sure we address this issue of mitigation with DSL, and that we have a recommendation that at least in Clatsop County and certainly in the southwest portion of Clatsop County, that we don't allow the DSL mitigation scheme to allow people to fill our wetlands either in exchange for money paid into the treasury, or some mitigating it with some land bank wetland off in Eugene or Bend or some other part of the state. I mean, it makes no sense to me that for people to destroy our wetlands just because they've got the money to do it.
And we don't have very many. We don't have any to lose.
So I don't know that that's necessarily part of policy 4 under this category of wildlife habitat resources, but I didn't want that idea to get away. But I think specifically for policy 4, I'd certainly like to see the 50-foot setback, and I'd like to see the recommendations that Linda put forward, proposed as our recommendations for policy 4. Anybody else have other thoughts on policy 4?
There was a few more in what I submitted. I just want to be sure. I just want to be sure that where the setback runs from, whether it runs from the stream bank, or whether it runs from the line of non-aquatic vegetation, that is made clear and it is defined. Also, I would like to be sure that the policies are applied everywhere, that we're not somehow having things left out, as currently is happening with the 50-foot setback. For some reason, we've been picked out to not have it apply, as we've talked about before. Also, and this one is, let's see, that no variances should be granted to encroach on those setbacks, that those setbacks are scientifically determined and they should not be subject to discretionary changes. So that's about it.
Just to clarify, this is Julia again. We don't have the ability legally to tell someone they cannot apply for a variance. That's just not something that's legal. The other thing is if we change setbacks on somebody's property after they own it, and I'm not saying that you can't, but they have the ability to apply under Measure 49 for relief, and they have the ability to apply for a variance. We don't have actually legally the ability to restrict that.
You know, I wish the county would seek another legal opinion on the effect of Measure 49, because I believe that if you purchased the property after Measure 49 was in effect, then you took the property with the rules and regulations in effect at the time of the purchase. I believe Measure 49, which is decades old now, was the ability really to grandfather in people who owned property before regulations went into effect. So, you know, yes, if you change things, there can be ramifications, but not as broadly as I've always heard Clatsop County interpret it.
So I mean, I agree with Linda, but I just don't know where we would logically insert that recommendation. I'm not sure it's in what we're talking about today. It seems like more of a global recommendation about variances in general. So I think it's an important point. I agree with the point. We've certainly seen variances granted to people with respect to wetland setbacks in Arch Cape, where the person that bought the property had the conditions of setback established and known before they bought the property, but somehow they still successfully managed to get a variance under the hardship rule, or ignoring the hardship rule, and which was a total mystery to me. So I really think that's an important point that needs to get addressed. I just don't know if we address it here. Any comments from Ian or Julia?
Ian and I are both getting ready to speak. Ian, did you want to go first?
Go ahead, Julia.
Okay. Variance is a very high bar, but there are certain elements of it that are fairly easy, other elements of it that are really, really difficult. Among the most difficult aspects is to prove that you do not have reasonable use of the property without obtaining the variance, that the variance has to be the minimum amount necessary, and that the variance cannot be self-imposed. Those three elements are usually really the most difficult ones for people to work their way through. But if they do, then they're going to qualify for the variance. And sometimes it matters, you know, what kind of legal counsel they obtain in order to make those arguments. We've seen some that were pretty well crafted. But it goes to a hearings officer. It's not something that's determined by staff. It goes to a hearings officer, again, an attorney versed in land use. And if someone wants to make that argument, if they want to apply for a variance and make those arguments, we don't have the ability to tell them that they cannot make the application.
Well, you know, honestly, I would rather see the setbacks be tailored to the size, for like the forest practices had, is it, where they're tailored to the size of the stream or the creek or the and have variances discouraged, because the whole point of the setback is to protect many things. You know, under this goal, this particular part of the goal is to protect wildlife habitat, but it's also to protect riparian vegetation. It's to protect the waters themselves. It's to do a lot of, to keep them from being destroyed. And I think it'd be almost better than having a 50-foot setback and then giving someone a 48-foot variance. It'd be better to have, maybe if it's just a creek, a 20-foot setback, and like have it be firm, you know, because like I say, these things are scientifically determined what is safe for that particular body of water or that particular piece of land. And so making exceptions is just because someone wants one, which is, that sounds kind of rude, but it's, for at least some of them I've seen that way.
If I could
It
jump in
doesn't
just to
seem
clarify,
compatible. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to clarify that the staff recommendation for policy 4 is to adopt the riparian standards, riparian buffer standards that are currently in the Oregon Forest Practices Act, which I'll put up on the screen now again. So those are based on the size of the stream. And to my knowledge, ODF and ODFW have clear definitions for these things and how they determine whether it falls into the large, medium, or small category, and whether they're fish bearing or non-fish bearing will also affect the setback requirement. So there's a scale going anywhere from 20 feet for a non-fish bearing small stream up to 100 feet for fish bearing streams that are large. So what you're saying, Linda, I believe is what we are proposing to do. So I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page with that. And
Right.
and again, I believe these are well defined, which I know you were asking for also. And I would agree with Julia that, you know, the standard for a variance is very high. Not being very familiar with the case, the couple of cases in the Southwest coastal area that you've brought up, you know, I regularly tell applicants that the threshold is pretty high for approving a variance and direct them to the variance approval criteria. And that often results in people looking at a different plan because a variance really is pretty difficult to get. And then also agree with Julia on regulatory takings. And, you know, that's always going to be something that comes up when regulations change. You know, there's precedent at the Supreme Court level for regulatory takings. And so I think that's pretty well established as far as how it works.
I'd just like to point out that I don't think the Forest Practices Act deals with wetlands. So we will need to add
Right,
some
so
additional, does it?
This policy, that's another thing that I wanted to bring up, because I think, you know, we're talking about riparian zones in this policy, not wetlands. And so it may be a different discussion. You know, riparian zones by definition are adjacent to a water body. Wetlands aren't always adjacent to a water body. They are often adjacent to a water body, but you can have wetlands that, you know, don't have any area that are submerged by water. It can just be an area that is predominantly wet, but has no surface water. And so I think it's important to make a distinction between water bodies and their adjacent riparian zones, which may include wetlands, and then wetlands, which are a different animal, which again, we'll be addressing later on. And so currently we have setback requirements for riparian areas, and that's what we're talking about now, would be adjusting those to be, you know, better defined and to have bigger riparian setbacks or buffers in some cases and smaller in other cases. But setbacks to wetlands, I think, is a different topic.
Okay, but we need, this is about wildlife habitat, and wetlands do implicate that. So someplace in these policies, wetlands have to come back into it. If not policy 4, then a new policy.
Yeah, and I absolutely second that, because, you know, there are lots of birds, there's animals, there's salmonids that depend on those wetlands. So, you know, wetlands in and of themselves are are their own thing, and they'd have value for the community, but they certainly hold value under today's topic for wildlife habitat. So I agree. If it's not under policy 4, maybe it's slotted somewhere else, but for sure we do need to protect wetlands, whether or not a specific wetland is associated with a river, stream, or lake.
May I ask a question, Ian? The reference to 20 feet, is that 20 cubic feet per minute? Or what is the 20 feet in these? Where does it say it?
I think I've got that up on the screen now. That would be a setback. So a 20-foot setback.
Measured from where?
So normally if it's a non-tidally influenced water body, you would measure from the ordinary high water mark. And there's a scientific process to determine where that line is. And then if it's a tidally influenced water body, it would be the mean higher high water line. And that is also a well-defined term. So it has to do with where the surface water is located, right? So ordinary high water mark and mean higher high water mark or line.
Okay, so with that said, in my eyes, this the table from Mr. Sinnott that you have on the screen really is very specific to flowing water bodies, whether it's a large, small, medium, or large river, creek, whatever. It does not address wetlands. So again, maybe the wetland discussion is a discussion that we have when we get to wetlands in March. But wetlands do and should appear associated with one of these policies under the category of wildlife habitat, because wetlands, even if they're disconnected from a flowing body of water, are important for wildlife habitat.
Yeah, so I've got that noted here on table 3 for new policies, to develop policies inclusive of wetlands, not just riparian zones. And I'll add to that, i.e. setbacks to wetlands. And then just as a reminder, we are working with CREST over the winter to study wetlands in Clatsop County, and we will be getting some updated mapping and inventory descriptions of the wetlands countywide. And then they are also working on some policy research for us, and we'll develop a set of potential policies related to wetlands. And so those will come before you in March.
And just to kind of bring this to a close, I did read through all this, the current comprehensive plan, is very, very interesting, all the different animals and birds and things, but the term wetland was mentioned a number of times in there in different contexts as being part of the wildlife habitat that is sought to be protected. So we're not asking for something new, we're just asking to have that not overlooked.
Right. Yeah. No, wetlands are undeniably important habitat, and we have lots of language in the comprehensive plan to that effect. And again, with Goal 5, these topics are very interrelated, and so we don't want to compartmentalize things too much. I agree with you there.
All right. I think we've beat policy 4 to death, and we have some specific recommendations that Ian has taken down. So perhaps we can move on to policy 5, talking about relying on the State Department of Water Resources to ensure minimum stream flow standards are required for the maintenance of fish habitat. And here the comment, I suppose, the staff comment is this: it's not something the county monitors, and Oregon Water Resources is supposed to do this. My takeaway from that is that whether it's part of policy 5 or whether it's a new policy, I think the county does need to identify and inventory fish-bearing streams and fish-bearing bodies of water, where those bodies of water would include marshes and wetlands. So clearly there are bodies of water that one could argue whether it's a river, a stream, a creek, or a dry creek bed, or an intermittent stream, or a lake or a pond, where there are wildlife that depends on that source of water or source of moisture. And to a certain extent, I think those things ought to be inventoried by the county. And I didn't see anywhere else where there was a requirement to do that, but I think it ought to be a requirement so that at least everybody knows where they are. And then, maybe there's, as you pointed out earlier, Ian, maybe there's some criteria for how things actually get on the list and categorized, but at least the existence ought to be inventoried somewhere.
So currently, I believe those inventories are with the state, and there's some information in the background materials in your packet regarding that inventory. So currently, the practice is to notify Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and occasionally U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with development applications which may impact fish habitat. So again, there is some information in the background materials. There's currently not a county developed inventory that I'm aware of fish-bearing streams, but that data is available at the state level. And I have a map here. As you are all probably aware, one of the main concerns is salmon habitat. So in the Southwest Coastal Planning Area, this orange buffer here is on Arch Cape Creek, and that's identified as essential salmon habitat. And then also at the mouth of Asbury Creek. So those appear to be the only two sections that are identified as essential salmon habitat, but this isn't a map that shows all fish-bearing streams. However, I believe the state has a map of that.
Yeah, so I did try, and I followed one of the links I think you included for an interactive state state resource that purported to show fish habitat areas, and it was really difficult. There were lots of different little boxes with all different colors and no key that I could find to say what those colors represented. But in any event, given the wonders of modern technology, I would certainly like to suggest that it probably wouldn't be that difficult for the county to include a layer in the county's mapping system that at least brought forward the state data on which streams, creeks, or rivers in Clatsop County are fish bearing. So that'd be my recommendation, is that Clatsop County include a layer, so people, whether the people is the citizens that live here or developers or somebody in California that wants to put in a casino or a resort or something. I mean, so that people can find it without having to go to 42 different places.
So I think I've got the map up on the share screen here from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. So it's the Oregon Fish Habitat Distribution and Barriers map. So I've got all of the habitat distribution layers turned on, and then we have barriers as well. So you can see those kind of zoomed in on the southwest coastal area here.
Ian, if you click on one of the segments or on that red dot, it should bring up a pop-up, and that should give you information. Yeah, there you go.
So
You
we've
can
got
see
winter steelhead, coho, a culvert barrier here, cutthroat trout, another barrier. So it looks like the map has quite a bit of data, but I understand what you're saying, Charles, that it would be handy to have this sort of data available on county maps. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the request, is that it be available, as a layer on the county maps, just like many other things or layers on the county map. And there's perhaps I've made the assumption that if it's on this map, then Clatsop County recognizes it, and that may be a leap for me to assume that, but I'd certainly like to have that be a definitive statement that if these fish-bearing streams are recognized on the ODFW map, then Clatsop County recognizes them, just as if a local wetland is on the National Wetland Inventory map, then I would expect Clatsop County to recognize them. And if it's not the case, then something's wrong.
All right, I added a suggestion there next to policy 5 to identify and inventory fish-bearing streams and other bodies of water, including connected marshes and wetlands. Add the information to county web maps, and then adding language to require county recognized resources mapped by state and or federal agencies, similar to how we review wetlands.
Perfect.
Okay.
And anything else more on policy 5? So policy 6 had to do with building permit applications, where a stream is proposed as the water source, requiring a water right permit. And I mean, to me, that is so incredibly obvious, and I'm surprised that it's even in there, but the staff recommendations retain it, and I'd agree with that 100%. So, I mean, I thought that was just a state law anyway, but okay.
Right. I'm not sure what might have been different when that policy was initially adopted. But I agree, it would be good to retain. And if you haven't looked at that section of the standards document, there's a nice table there which shows the different available water supply methods for potable water. And so, yes, we require for any development that requires potable water to verify that they have an appropriate water right.
All right, so and policy 7, so this is kind of where we get to what I was talking about earlier, in terms of the mitigation and the credits and the wetland land bank and that kind of thing. So again, I don't know exactly where the right place is to bring that in, because in practice, the county always, if the word wetland arises in connection with a piece of property or a development, the county immediately defers to DSL. And unfortunately, from my standpoint, and from perhaps the citizens that live in the community's standpoint, DSL has this, pay to play policy where, you just bring in a bag full of money and you can fill wetlands to your heart's content. And that, I think that is not in the best interest of our community, certainly not here in the Southwest coastal planning area.
I would just say that I think the mitigation policies at the state are a little bit more nuanced than that, but I understand the concern, particularly with any fish-bearing streams or wetlands that are connected to essential salmon habitat. There's no amount of alteration that can be done, at least without it. But as you guys have discussed, many times, there's the 50 cubic yard threshold, and then there's also the whole complex set of rules that apply to mitigation. So one thing I think we'll be discussing in March, again, will be local wetland regulations. And so something I know your group has been interested in is adopting the local wetland inventory for Arch Cape and developing a specific set of local wetland regulations that would apply to those inventoried wetlands. And that could include things like setbacks and limits to the ability to mitigate impacts and things like that.
I had a question on this one. It addresses its value to fish habitat, the end of this last sentence. And would it be worthwhile to add upland plants and animals, or plants and wildlife, to the protection? It's not just the fish, but it's also the creatures that live on the banks and in the grasses around it.
And the birds that come to nest there or eat there.
Right. It's got to be looked at as a habitat for an ecosystem, I should say, rather than just a place where fish can swim.
Yeah, just say wildlife and fish habitat would solve it.
Right.
I just don't like the idea that the county is relying strictly on the state and doesn't have its own set of protections, again, for stream alterations here. You're recognizing, this recognizes the right thing, that they should not adversely affect the stream's integrity or its value as a habitat. but I think there should be a, DSL has its role, but it's not complete. Local protection programs are important, so I would like to see that the county not rely solely on DSL, but also create local protection programs for their riparian areas as well as the wetlands.
And just so we're all on the same page, we currently what we have is in section 4.500 in the standards document, riparian vegetation. We also have a section S2.500, which is erosion control development standards and applies to negative impacts that can be caused to wetlands and streams and other water bodies. And then we also have the lake and wetland zoning designation, which currently only exists in the Clatsop Plains, but has been discussed as possibly being applied elsewhere, including the Southwest Coastal Planning Area. So there are definitely policies that currently exist other than just relying on the state. I just wanted to make sure we all know that.
Okay, then I think maybe policy 7 should be reworded to make it clear that you're not just relying on the state, but there's also, in addition to your own programs, something about it makes it sound like you haven't got those things, when it sounds like we're in good shape there.
Yeah, maybe you would say something like, in addition to existing county policies, the county shall rely on division of state lands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Something like that. To me, that would make sense. Okay, so policy 8, I didn't have any comments on that except under staff comments and recommendations. It says public access provisions are included in standards for all major rivers, and again, that the word major, it seems like it's jumping out for a definition. Maybe it is defined somewhere, and if it is, great. If it's not, it ought to be.
I suggest the word encouraged should be struck and put a word required should be put in place of it. Public access.
Yeah.
I mean, with an eye towards being aspirational, I have no problem with that.
It seems like maybe asking kind of a lot of every requirement is pretty strong.
Well, I agree with you, Margaret, but again, I mean, if we're going to be aspirational, why not ask? The odds of it surviving the 3-year process is probably small, but I mean, if we don't at least ask, if somebody doesn't ask for it, it sure as heck isn't going to ever get addressed.
This one also goes back to some Supreme Court precedent where there has to be an essential nexus between a development proposal and the conditions of approval placed on that development proposal. And so, I agree, it's an aspirational thing. I'm not sure, it probably would depend on a project to project basis whether there was, you know, the essential nexus pass would test or test would be passed to be able to require that as a condition of approval for a certain development.
Can you tell me what essential
what-
nexus means?
Yes, sorry, it's been a while since I studied for the planning exam, but Julia might be able to chime in on this one. Essential nexus basically means the condition of approval has to relate to the development proposal in such a way that there's a reasonable connection between the impact of the development and what is being required as a condition. So the essential nexus might be, you know, if the development is creating a situation where public access is restricted or would be restricted, then you can require the development to create a new public access opportunity. So there's the connection between those two things. But if a development would maintain the same level of public access or wouldn't affect public access in any way, then you may not be able to require a new public access or an improved public access to be created. There has to be a reason for it, in other words.
It says if it's not restricted, shall not restrict existing public access. So what this statement says is just that new developments are required to provide additional public access. But we should probably say if, but it already says it. If it's not, if it restricts public access that exists, they're required to put in new public access. That's what it should say. Maybe the word additional is the wrong word. Replacement might be a better word.
Are there any examples where this has been a problem, just so I can kind of wrap my head around what the issue is?
So one example, I believe the one that went to the Supreme Court was Nolan v. Dolan, which was in Oregon. And there was a city that required a developer to put a public bike path in the development and also pay for it. And so that was challenged up to the Supreme Court as a taking of that person's property. And so there was basically they developed this rule or review process to evaluate whether a condition of approval was equal in magnitude essentially to the impact of the development. So with the impact of a development being greater, then you can apply greater conditions of approval. But if the impact of a development is lower, then you can't apply very intensive conditions. That's a very simplified way of looking at it.
All right, so do we, I mean, as I said, from my standpoint, we can either leave it the way it is or put in required.
I think that what Ian has written is probably a good compromise.
Okay, good. So policy 9, Columbia white-tailed deer habitat. It's not clear to me that we have any of that in our portion of the world, but So I didn't have any comments and I didn't have any problems with the staff recommendation, but I'll let others comment.
It seemed to me that this could permit people to eat away at white-tailed deer habitat an acre at a time. Each year you get an acre. And am I misunderstanding something, Ian?
So was it the language that said basically the threshold is 1 acre, the threshold for this review? So the county shall submit all proposals with a potential for substantial impact on habitat. For example, those activities of more than 1 acre.
Right.
So I guess my point is, if a guy does 0.99 of an acre and then he doesn't have to have review, he just can go ahead and do it.
Theoretically, I suppose so. I don't know how the 1 acre threshold was determined. So you could, potentially recommend removing that piece of the policy so that the county would just submit all proposals with a potential for impact, and substantial impact, maybe subjective language if you wanted to remove the word substantial so that any potential impact would be referred to Fish and Wildlife.
That's what I would like to see. I don't see there any reason to have any kind of exceptions. For review.
I'm fine with that.
So am I. Okay, policy 10. County will establish procedure for protecting sensitive nesting sites. And the recommendation is that the current practice is to send public notices to ODF and ODFW when staff believes these species are threatened. The only thing I could think of here is I think that the community should be notified. I mean, I don't know how this works in practice, but the staff comments and recommendations section says that your current practice is to send public notices to ODF and ODFW. It doesn't say anything about informing the public or letting the public kind of weigh in on the fact that maybe the public knows a lot more than the county staff about where sensitive nesting sites are. That was my only thought.
Well, there's a way bigger problem on this one, way bigger. It must say 10 times in the current comprehensive plan that the county will adopt a sensitive bird habitat overlay, or at least create an inventory, and they will create management programs for limiting conflicting uses for these various species. And that, putting buffers around nests and identifying nests and things are all part of that. So I'm kind of shocked that 40 years later, that hasn't happened. And I think that language, I mean, in the comprehensive plan, it's repeated over and over for each group of species, the waterfowl and the fur bearers and the the eagles and the osprey. But I think that's what should be done, is we should just continue with that policy. And I wrote it down, and it's the simplest way I could here on my sheet. County will adopt a sensitive bird habitat zone overlay and develop a management plan to protect significant species habitat from conflicting uses. And I think this is kind of maybe trying to summarize that in policy 10, but I think it's clearer in the comprehensive plan itself, and I'd like to retain what's in the comprehensive plan.
That satisfies my concern with this particular one.
Yeah, I would agree.
And so we do have a sensitive bird habitat overlay district. I've got that pulled up on the share screen here. It's section 4.200 in the zoning ordinance. So if you haven't had a chance to review that,
Okay.
I would encourage you to take a look through it. Just briefly, it talks about northern bald eagles, great blue herons, band-tailed pigeons, and snowy plover, and refers to the comprehensive plan maps of those sensitive nesting sites. And then there is a set of development and use criteria. So for example, if a proposed use or activity is considered to have the potential for affecting a sensitive bird habitat, if it is located within a quarter mile of an eagle nest or roosting site, or an osprey nest is within 600 feet, or band-tailed pigeon mineral spring, or it is within 400 feet of snowy plover nesting habitat. Essentially, the procedure is to notify the Department of State Lands, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, which would be able to make recommendations for habitat protection, mitigation, those kinds of things.
Okay,
So
well,
does
I
the-
didn't know that, so perhaps it's not such a problem. I'll read through that, but why would the comprehensive plan not just say that the county, why would that not be in the comprehensive plan?
Most likely the language that's in the comprehensive plan was developed prior to the actual creation and adoption of the sensitive bird habitat overlay. So it's probably one of those things that's just out of date, because it looks like that policy has been implemented. So maybe the language could just be updated to refer to that section of the zoning code.
Well, that's fine. I would like to make sure it's in the comprehensive plan though, so that no one takes it away.
This is Julia. I was just going to mention that I have requested from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I may need to request it from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, updated maps to be able to have better resources to be able to determine that 600 feet or that quarter mile, or so that we have better access, so that we know when we should be sending notice out to those agencies. I requested it several months ago. I have not received it yet, so I haven't quit trying to get updated information. They don't do these updates very often. It looks like it's maybe once a decade or so. So the one that I'm looking for is actually from 2010, I guess. So perhaps by the time we get to the end of all this, there will be a new one from 2020 that we'll be able to incorporate. At least that's my hope.
But the SBHO is limited to the birds listed. Is that right?
Correct.
I only asked because I remember when there was talk of the guy doing an RV park or whatever over there by Arcadia or something.
Yeah.
There was some talk of another bird, marbled murrelet or something like that. I just didn't know if others should be included, or does that really start to get down into the weeds a little bit.
It sort of gets into the weeds a little bit because animals come and go off these different lists, or they change priority on the lists. For example, the bald eagle is no longer considered endangered or threatened or sensitive. However, it is still protected, but it's protected under a different policy. So if we can remain vague enough or open-ended enough, then we would continue to provide notice for any animal that's listed, any bird that's listed. We would always provide notice. But we can add other species if you wanted to add the murrelet, for example, or the snowy plover, or whatever's not listed now. But just know that the way things are going, it's not obviously going to get any better. But we don't want to just limit it to those animals. It's whatever's listed.
And
Well,
then there was some famous owl that I can't remember what it was, but some famous owl that didn't seem to be listed either. So
That was
Well,
the
then-
name. It was called the famous owl.
Well, the murrelet is endangered. That's why people were so concerned about it. That's an important one, actually, even though it's very small.
okay, anything more on this one? We're getting short on time here, I guess. Policy 11 seems to be specific to River Ranch, and I don't even know where that is, but I certainly didn't have anything to add to policy 11.
I wondered if it should be in there. It seems like it's very specific and it's not aspirational. It seems to be rather administrative. Why is it in the plan at all?
I would guess that it's probably another one that was included at the inception of the comprehensive plan and was implemented through, you know, the zoning ordinance. And just for the record, River Ranch is in the northeast part of the county, the very northeast portion, near Westport, near Puget Island.
Okay,
Or should it be struck? Should it be taken out?
It could be. So it looks like Gail put a note in here that much of the southern portion of the peninsula is zoned open space, parks, and recreation, and that there's about 36 acres that's in a residential zoning designation, which has not been developed yet. But there's no recommendation, at least from Gail, as to whether to strike this policy. Julia, did you have any thoughts on this one?
Well, actually, I'm the one who wrote it, or wrote the recommendation or the staff comment. I did the goal 5 stuff for habitat and restoration. So River Ranch is a kind of a strange, it's on a peninsula of land. You do get to it through Columbia County, and it has, Ian's going to pull it up. Let's take a look at it so you can understand a little bit. It has some interesting qualities, I guess. There it is. And if you bring up the zoning, you can kind of see that River Ranch is, you see the subdivision there, and then you see the OPR zoning and the RA1 zoning. So why it's so specific, I can only assume that somebody was trying to create a situation where it would be protected around the OPR zoning when it was first developed, when the zoning first was implemented. So it's outdated, the language is outdated, but I'm kind of inclined to check in with the Northeast area group about it. You want to throw the wetland layer on there? Yeah. So some of that is really, it's zoned RA1, but it's not particularly developable. And I know most of you are not familiar with this site, so you're not aware that it's pretty damp. If you throw the flood hazard on there, you might see some other issues. Yeah. So anyway, I don't really have any comments, I guess, other than a lot of it is already protected, that area that sort of rings it.
I suggest that we
I would
recommend
be I would be inclined to defer to the group that's responsible for this area. I don't see how our group should be weighing in on this.
Yeah, I agree, but we should bring it up that it could well be just struck and let the Northeast group have their way with it, but just so it brings attention to that idea that it seems inconsistent with the plan.
Well, one thing I would mention is that that you had been just dealing with the whole Columbia white-tailed deer question. That type of habitat, that brushy and wetland area there along the river, that is that animal's habitat. So anything that happens in there is going to receive public notice to Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And in fact, the Julia Butler Wildlife Hansen Wildlife Reserve is on the Washington side, not too far away. That whole stretch, there's an area there by the Wana Mill as it goes in toward Westport. That's the habitat for those animals. So that's the area where we would provide notice. That's where they are now.
So I've added in the notes
Okay,
here
well,
for policy 11, just a few questions. What is the recommendation of the Northeast Planning Area CAC? By the way, they meet at 4 o'clock today. And then does this policy need to be kept or can it be struck? Or does it need to be modified?
yeah, good. So policy 12, so again, my interpretation of the policy 12 is that it applies to forested areas and not to non-forested areas.
I would just say it's more of a use than an area. So if a use is regulated by the Forest Practices Act, then this would apply.
I'm fine with it as it is with your recommendations, Steph.
So Charles, I had a couple of other proposed policies that I thought we could talk about.
Okay, so do you want to do that here under the, while we're talking about the county at large, or do you want to do that as we go back to look at the table 2 for the Southwest Coastal planning area specifically?
Well, I'm not sure. It seems like, let me find out so I don't end up being wrong again. Maybe the county has policies on these already. Removal of riparian vegetation. Is that prohibited or regulated in some way?
It is. So back to standards document S 4.500, that's the chapter titled Protection of Riparian Vegetation. Here in the development standards, if an area is subject to this section, which we've discussed earlier, we would potentially be expanding which areas are subject to this section by adopting the classifications and setbacks recommended by Mike Sinnott for different stream sizes and different setbacks accordingly, then these development standards would apply. So number one is all development shall be located outside the zone of riparian vegetation, which is at this time a 50-foot buffer from both estuarine as well as freshwater lakes, rivers, river segments.
How about creeks?
Well, that's something right now where, so the staff recommendation here in table 3 is standards regarding riparian and stream setbacks are ambiguous and rely on terms that are not well defined. So area purpose and areas included here, number 2 says lakes, reservoirs, and river segments. And so it doesn't say creeks, it doesn't say streams. And so that's an area that could be clarified by adopting the recommendation from ODFW to go based on their definitions of small, medium, and large streams. So it would clear up the ambiguity that we currently have of what's a river segment. Right, so then in the development standards, to answer your question, Linda, vegetation within the riparian setback shall be maintained, i.e. no removal, with the following exceptions being the removal of dead, diseased, or dying trees that pose erosion or safety hazards, vegetation removal necessary to direct water access to the Columbia River estuary for an approved water-dependent or water-related use, or removal of vegetation necessary for the placement of structural shoreline stabilization.
Okay. Okay, and what is the, like, if you were going to put something in the comprehensive plan that addresses these type of things, what is the kind of category it would be under? What's the big picture? Just protection of the streams, the water bodies? Well, never mind. Okay, how about do we prohibit filling of wetlands and estuary areas because it adversely affects wildlife and fish habitat quality? That would be a policy I think would be desirable. It would overrule a current practice, but it's something we would love to see in the coastal region where we don't have very many wetlands or estuarian areas, and we want to protect them.
So we currently, for wetlands which are non-coastal shoreland wetlands, we go through the notification to DSL procedure for any proposed fill. And then for estuarine wetlands or coastal shoreland wetlands, we have the shoreland overlay, 4.080 in the zoning code. So this has a couple different categories of coastal shorelands. And so category 1 are significant non-estuarine marshes, riparian resources, significant fish and wildlife habitat, exceptional aesthetic resources, and then historical and archaeological sites. And then category 2 is all shorelands which aren't part of category 1. And so then we have developments which are permitted in those types of shorelands. So in category 1, the more sensitive shorelands, we have low intensity water dependent recreation, navigational aids, shoreline stabilization, water related uses. And then in in category 2, it includes all of the uses that are approved in or permitted in category 1, as well as some additional uses listed there. So that's what we currently have. But again, you know, when we discuss wetlands, I believe we will be discussing local wetland regulations, which would be inclusive of all inventoried wetlands.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll hold the idea, but it seems like it would be in the county's and in the community's interest to prohibit filling these and also draining them. You know, both of those are ways to destroy them. And like I keep saying, we don't have very many, and we need them for fish and wildlife habitat and for many other things, including open spaces. So.
And flood control.
And flood control, yes.
Okay, so we don't have too much time left, but I would like to try and get through the Southwest Coastal Community Plan policies and goals in Table 2. And kind of tagging on to what Ian was just saying, at the beginning of this thing, it says coastal and stream shorelands policy. So I'm a little bit unclear as to exactly what that means, coastal and stream shorelands. And more specifically, I think it would be a really good thing, since we just were talking about some specific wording in the standards document that applies to shorelands. I think it would be a really good thing if the shoreland overlay was clearly identified on the Clatsop County GIS map with an overlay or layer.
Yes, we would like that too, Charles. We only have part of it mapped on GIS right now, but it is, I believe, on our project list to get the entire shoreland overlay completed in GIS, so we have that layer available.
And that's actually part of something that we're hoping to get via CREST. We want this very much.
All right, good. Well, at least we all want it. So back to this particular section, why for the Southwest Coastal Community Plan, why does it seem to talk in the header about restricting all of these policies to just the coastal and stream shorelands? I don't, maybe somebody can explain that to me.
I'm not sure, Charles. I know you guys brought that up at your last meeting, and wanted that header to be more inclusive of all water bodies. And so I put a note in here this time around because I noticed in the Southwest Coastal Community Plan, in the section where it breaks down all the different quote unquote landscape units of the planning area, there is a landscape unit that's described under the title Water Bodies and Coastal and Stream Shorelands. And so my assumption is that the set of policies that we're looking at was intended to have that full title. And for some reason, instead of Water Bodies and Coastal and Stream Shorelands policies, it just says Coastal and Stream Shorelands policies. So I don't know if that was unintentionally omitted, the term water bodies, or if there was a reason that it was left out. But again, I found that as I was going back through the community plan, that there is a landscape unit that is more inclusive, which I think is what you were looking for.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this should just be, you should just strike the whole header and just have these policies apply to the Southwest Coastal Planning Area. And I don't see any distinction between whether it's, quote, coastal or whether it's, quote, shoreland. It ought to, if it's in our planning area, then these policies should apply.
And the streams all eventually run into one another. Everything is interconnected. I agree. These might be policies for water resources. That's what seems to me.
Okay, so with that said, policy 1, I didn't have any specific problem with policy 1.
And so the first 4 here were all policies that you looked at your last meeting, but I included them again here just because, you know, we're looking at it from a slightly different angle this time around. So if there were habitat specific recommendations that you wanted to add on to what you discussed last time around, you'd have that opportunity.
Okay, good. So I guess
With
for
policy-
policy 1, go
I
ahead.
have a question about it. Vicinity is a word that bothers me. It's too vague. Perhaps we should say the riparian buffer or something like that, that makes more clarity as to what we're referring to. Yeah, riparian zone. Does that make sense to everyone?
Are we still going to review the coastal plan when we finish the comprehensive plan so that they kind of work together? Or are we going to be doing them at the same time now?
I believe we still have specific planning area, community plan reviews scheduled for the end of the process.
Okay, good.
But with that, I would also say, you know, part of incorporating them in now is to keep our process streamlined. So, you know, it may be a less intensive review of the community plans than was originally imagined, because we're spending time on them now during this whole process. But I think that makes a lot of sense because, again, everything is so interconnected with this.
Yeah. Well, I remember mentioning we look at these so that we could have ideas that might go into the comprehensive plan because this was from our own community. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, so for policy 1, I'm okay. I understand Todd's point, but to me, vicinity is a little bit broader than being more specific. And at a policy level, I'd rather cast a wider net, I suppose. And then as this works its way through to some kind of a standards document, which hopefully it would, then maybe that would be the time you get a little bit more specific, but that's just my thought.
Well, what I don't like about policy 1 is the first part talks about grading, excavation, and filling, all 3. And it says it should be controlled in the vicinity. And then when it gets to the stream buffer itself, it only talks about filling being prohibited. Is grading and excavation allowed in stream buffers? I don't think so.
We would refer to those rules in S 4.500, so the development standards in riparian zones. And then if it's in the shoreland overlay, then we would refer to the development standards there. So it depends.
Okay, I'm going to go back and read those because obviously there's quite a bit there.
Right.
All right, anything else on policy 1? I assume, yeah, okay, so policy 3, I mean, I have a vague memory that we did talk about this before, although I'm kind of surprised that the Advisory Design Review Committee showed up again, which I don't think that exists, but maybe you're saying we're going to bring it back and And that's a good thing. So I wouldn't argue with it, but I was just surprised it showed up again.
Well, this is just the policy as it's currently written. So no changes have been made to the Southwest Coastal Community Plan since your last meeting.
Okay. Anybody have any other comments on policy 3 for Arch Cape Creek and Asbury Creek?
I don't, and I'm okay with 4, 6, and 7 as well.
Okay, so 4, and I may have said this before, and hopefully I did. For 4, I'd like to add the word cobbles, but unless that's somehow included in the definition of gravel.
I think we did that last meeting.
Yeah, we did, but I don't know if it was this particular policy.
It was.
Okay, good.
Yep, I got it. Yeah, I got it there from the last meeting.
All right. Okay.
But I'll put it here again so we know.
Charles, if we're gonna end at 12, are we gonna give the public opportunity to make some comments since, I don't know, are we gonna go longer?
I guess it's kind of up to the committee, although I suppose staff probably might have a deadline. So I guess I would propose that I don't have a problem with continuing myself, but if we're going to end, then I think, yes, we should have an opportunity for the public to comment, and maybe we carry forward the rest of this until next time.
So it looks like there's still a fairly substantial number of policies to go through. So I would say, since we have 2 more CAC meetings today to prepare for and host, my preference would be, if you have comments on these policies, to send them to me. The best way to do it is just to use the table, or if you want to just shoot me an email, if you could just be clear which policy your recommendation refers to, then I can slot them into the right place. And then at your next meeting, under old business, we can review all the recommendations you submit, and have a quick review of those before we jump into the next topic.
Sounds good to me. So Ian, you want to poll the public?
Yeah, so it looks like we have Nancy just came off mute. Nancy, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, and I want to thank everyone for their hard work and their considerations for wildlife and nature. I was just hoping that staff, before the March meeting on wetlands, I think you said, could talk to the state mitigation person at DSL. I've done a number of mitigation projects, and I found them really reluctant. It's kind of a last resort to pay, and they prefer, if it's a small fragmented wetland, to have it restored in the same watershed for more effect. But I think that should be verified. It's not an easy process, and it's really done for fragmented wetlands that don't have much value, at least on their own. And then you also mentioned stream realignment. And I do a lot of work with land trusts, and we have a lot of red tape. Often land trusts have purchased land where a stream or creek has been diked or channelized, and they have to go through a lengthy process with the state and often the Army Corps to put in a more natural and more effective curve or sinuosity to the stream. So if you do something with that section, you might recognize that often stream realignment is done with better intentions than, say, development projects. So anyway, those are my 2 comments, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Nancy.
That's my granddaughter who chimed in there if you heard her. But anyway,
For
trying to
sure.
babysit, trying to multitask.
Very good. Is there anyone else? It looks like we still have Angie. Would you like to provide any comments?
Oh no, I'm good. I just wanted to see what this was all about, and I'm going to be going to the next meeting that you're doing too, the Clatsop Plains one. So just getting an overview of the whole process. My board is interested in learning more about it and where we can participate, and so I'm just trying to gather all the information I can to tell them kind of how and when, because it's a bit confusing.
Can I add one more comment? This is Nancy.
Sure.
When you're talking about buffers for wetlands or streams and expanding them, a lot of the area you cover is previously, zoned residential small lots, and it may be difficult. So I hope there is some kind of variance or I guess acknowledgement of pre-existing circumstance in the and it can continue to have that variance procedure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Angie, for your participation. We really appreciate that and look forward to you continuing to be involved. Are there any closing comments from the group?
I don't think I have any other than since Angie kind of made the note that they were looking for how they might participate as a member of what used to be Acola Creek Watershed Council, now North Coast Watershed Council. To me, I would say one of the key places that the watershed folks could participate is making sure that the watersheds do get delineated on the Clatsop County map. And I think we've talked about this before, and I think there is a willingness and an intent to include the watersheds for community water districts and water suppliers on the Clatsop County GIS map. And I think that'd be a real good thing to do, so that it's easy for people who are buying property, developing property, or doing logging operations to know exactly where the watersheds are. Other than that, everybody should have a great day.
Yeah, just to confirm, we are still planning to do a watershed layer for GIS. It's on our sort of long list of projects, but we are, looking to collect that data and get it turned into a layer that's available to the public.
All right, great.
I move the meeting be adjourned.
I'll second.
Somebody wants? Great. All in favor? Aye. Charles?
Aye.
Aye. Todd?
Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks everyone. See you next month. And
Thank you.
let me know if you have any questions about sending comments on those remaining policies. Otherwise, just feel free to email them over to me when you have them ready.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Ian.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.